Hey Heath. Hey Heath. Doing well. I had my normal wonderful Sunday morning routine. Wake up a little late, have a leisurely breakfast and coffee with my wife, and then usually Sunday mornings I go to the rock gym with some of my buddies and we do indoor rock climbing. So I just got back from that and got showered. I had and I have an echo here. I got to get off of this. Sunday morning routine. Hey Zach. Wake up a little late, have a leisurely breakfast and coffee with my wife, and then usually Sunday mornings I go to the rock gym with some of my buddies and we do indoor rock climbing. So I just got back from that. There we go. Yeah, it's fun. I've been doing rock climbing for about a little over 2 years. I think 2 years last October. I always did sports and things growing up, but I found as I got to be an adult that it was really difficult to keep. Yeah, thanks. I think I got it figured out now. I'm still new, figuring all of the technical stuff on this out. You shouldn't be able to hear it anymore. I have a hard time getting motivated to do much exercising. But what I really love about the rock climbing is that it keeps me both mentally engaged and physically engaged. So, you have to be aware of what you're doing on the wall. So it's very like a problem solving type thing. It's very mentally stimulating. So I've been able to keep focused. And we're up to about 3 times a week that we go now. All right, we'll have to see how this camera does with focusing over time. Play around with the lights, but anyway, this is what I'm going to be working on. We talked yesterday about, hey Cass, we talked yesterday about the projects that I'm working on, the Malifaux models. I have a couple other projects. I've been waiting for those Celtic busts. I got to get those started to paint when I get them. I just got actually contacted by a miniatures company to potentially do some box art for them, which is a first for me. So we'll see how that goes. And I have some Primaris Dreadnoughts that are partially assembled that I have to work on. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be working on a model that has nothing to do with any of those. Because I'm feeling a little bit of withdrawal from painting. I've just been assembling models so much the last several days that I'm itching to get some paint on a model. So this is, I think if I recall correctly, this is Black Veil Miniatures. I think it's called The Last Survivor or The Survivor or something like that is the name of the model. Basically, it's the main character from the Resident Evil movies, but they're not going to say that because of copyright issues. Mila Jovovich, is that her name? The actress. So she's primed. The darker brown color you see there is the primer color. I've been messing around with the Badger. I have no idea how they say the name of it. Styrolins, Styles, I don't know. But the Badger primers, which is cool. They come in a bunch of different colors. So this was just one of their brown primers. So I wanted to see how it looked on the model. For the Showgirl models I've been mixing the yellow primer they have with a little bit of gray and brown to get like a nice kind of khaki base tone to work off of and see how that is. Anyway, and then I've base coated her skin tone with the Scale 75 Fantasy and Games line Resurrection Flesh. So I really like this as a base color for the skin. What I'm going to do next is, yeah, how do you pronounce that, Zach? I have no idea. Stynylrez? Stynylrez? Yeah. Anyway, it's good stuff. I really like that primer. Goes on really smooth through an airbrush with just a touch of flow improver is what I've been using. And then I add a drop or two of slow dry. Being in Arizona, the air is quite dry. And so we get a lot of tip dry on airbrush. The paint will dry on the tip of the airbrush and it'll just clog everything up. And it stops working pretty quickly. So I put a little bit of slow dry in there, a little flow improver. And that stuff just paints like a dream right out of the bottle. So on this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of the P3 Flesh Wash. And a really crappy old brush. Now, if you don't have a really crappy old brush because you're a pretty new painter and all of your brushes are holy objects to you, then you're not going to use an old brush. But you can just use the back end of a brush if you want. So you can mix with the back end of one of your good brushes if you want. Or after you've been painting a while and you get brushes that start to look really crappy, you can just use those. I'm going to water this down quite a bit until the consistency is pretty thin. Mostly, it's tough to see on that. Here's on a paper towel. If you touch the paper towel, it just really runs. It's not too thick. We might have a visitor here in a second. I got a cat who's very needy, and I think he's about to climb all over my paint station. Are you coming on stream, buddy? See if I give him a lap, if he'll be satisfied. It's always a hazard in this household while you're painting. Zach probably has the same problem, and any painter with a cat. Even when they're not around, I'm constantly finding cat hair in all of my my painting projects. It just seems to float around until it lands on my paint station. All right, so I've got the P3 Flesh Wash well mixed and thin. This is a medium crappy brush. So these are interesting brushes. These, I shouldn't even say they're crappy. So these are sable brushes, so they are the natural bristles. Yeah, they will do that to you. Just come out of nowhere and sneak up on you. And why I tried them, I think the company's in Australia that does these back to basics. What's neat about them is at the time I was traveling to the game store and trying to paint there a lot to try to get out of the house. And what's neat is they screw apart. You can flip it around, screw it back into itself, and this is what you get. And so the bristles are protected, so they travel really well. The problem was, as often happens with the natural bristle brushes that you order through the mail, is that several of them that I got would not be ones that I picked if I picked them in person. I always like to, if I have the option, is to test them in person, because there can always be one stray bristle or something that just makes the brush not quite work right. So several of these had that problem, and then I was trying to fix them, and that's always a little dicey too, and I ended up kind of messing up a couple of them. And they're not quite as high quality as something like Winsor & Newton and Raphael brushes. So these have been kind of like my workhorse brushes when I don't need something super great. So for doing the work like I'm about to do, I'll just use one of these types of brushes. So they're still pretty decent quality. They'll get the job done for me, but I'm not going to do my detail work with them. Yeah, I wish Winsor & Newton did something like, their quality of brushes and bristles in a design like this. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm getting some of the wash on my brush, and I'm tapping the paper towel that's next to my paint station here. I really don't want a lot of paint on the brush because I don't really want this to be a wash. This is just staining the flesh. I'm just adding some tone. It should pool ever so slightly, but I don't want this to be like a crazy wash that I just glob paint all over the model, or glob ink all over the model. Hey Pack Team, what's up? So here's the thing about wet palettes. They are nice for what they are, and I have used one some, but I have two issues with the wet palette, which is why I don't use them all that much. And that is that, first of all, I find it difficult to control the consistency of my paint on a wet palette. So the wet palette kind of tends to just make everything fairly watered down. And while I do paint a lot with well watered down paints, there are times when I don't want that, and I want to better control my consistency. Because when I'm doing base coats versus layers versus glazes, things like that, I want a different consistency for all of those. And I find that the wet palette, for me, tends to kind of turn all of my paints into the same consistency. Part of that is I have been painting for quite a long time. So I really started painting for kind of in a serious way in 1998. And so since 1998, I have been painting just with these wells, these painting wells. And the first time I tried a wet palette was, I believe, last year, the beginning of last year. And you can teach an old dog new tricks, but sometimes they just don't want to use them. So I've been finding it really difficult to force myself to switch over to a wet palette and to just get used to doing that. So I just use my handy dandy well. I focus on controlling the consistency of my paint. Paint all my happy little clouds and happy little faces and tattoos on my miniatures, and just do what I have to. But I think that for people who are new to the hobby, to force yourself to buy or make and use a wet palette is a pretty good thing when you're first painting, because one of the biggest problems that new painters often face is that they don't water their paints down enough. Yeah, you're welcome. And it's just personal. I mean, painting is such a personal thing that, we all develop our own habits and find things that work for us. And for me, the wet palette just really doesn't work all that well for me. But I mean, the best painters in the world use wet palettes, so don't take that as any knock on wet palettes. It's just my own personal thing. But I find, it's learning to water your paints down is one of the most important things for new painters. And so, if you start off using a wet palette and sorry, just going back into chat here. If you're not, turn off the links just in case you get a jerk in chat. Yeah, I don't think that I have turned those off yet. I don't think I clicked that thing, but I will do that for the next stream. I just learned how to force Twitch to archive stuff. So the test broadcast I did yesterday is not archived. Nobody can go back and watch it, which is not the worst thing, because My wife showed up at one point during it and actually got on camera when there was nobody in chat, and stared right in the camera. And then later she's like, I don't really want to be on the stream. And I said, well, nobody was on it, and now the video is not there, so nobody can go back and watch it. But no, I wouldn't recommend using any paints straight from the pot. With very few exceptions. If you're using white paint to just paint a very, very, very extreme highlight, like a dot of light reflection on a piece of metal or something, you want your white thicker, so you can use that straight out of the pot. But generally speaking, the paints, when they're in the pot, they're a little thicker than what you want. The exception is if you might be brushing on airbrush paints or something. The airbrush paints are thinned in the bottle, and so you could probably get those right out of the bottle. But the thicker your paint, a couple things happen when your paint's thicker. First of all, you're going to see your brush strokes much more. It's much better to put on a few thin layers and have good coverage from a few thin layers than to have one thick layer. The paints are gonna flatten out and be smoother. You're also gonna see fewer brush strokes. So you shouldn't really paint right out of the pot. But again, it's whatever works for you, man. Like, painting is a personal thing. So, but yeah, so you get more even coverage from a few thin layers than one thick layer. You're not going to see your stuff. The other thing is when you start to build up layers and shadows. So if you're trying to do, if you're trying to do nice effects where you have nice transitions between your layers and things like that, the thinner your paint, the more you're going to see the layer that's below it when you apply your new paint, which is good if you're trying to create transitions, because you want to kind of build up to the next layer of color. And so the thinner your paint is and the more you do, several thin layers to transition, you're going to get a much cleaner fade between the colors, and it looks a lot nicer. So those are a couple of reasons why you might want to thin your paint. The other thing is that it's not going to cover up your details quite as much. A couple thin layers is going to cover your detail less than one thick layer. Hey, Mr. Heath, thanks for stopping by. But yeah, again, the airbrush paints you can probably use right out of the pot, but everything else I watered down first. I saw somebody else ask something. Let me see. Do I mix my own paints? Absolutely. I own, you can kind of see, maybe, no, none of them are on camera. I have probably 200 paints staring at me right now. And I very often will have mixtures that use at least 2, 3, sometimes 4 different paint colors. It's just more fun that way. I don't do a lot of paint by numbers kind of stuff. I just sort of go with the flow and do whatever. And oftentimes, one of the things that's nice about mixing your own paints is that you can help create cohesion on a model. So like on this model, for example, let's just say that I painted her, so all these belts and things like a leather color. And then let's say I decided to go with hunter green for these tights that she's wearing and maybe the little jacket she's got. What I might actually do is take some green and add it to my leather color, or use some green and shade down into the shadows. And what that does is it just creates a really subtle connection between the various points of the model and helps tie everything together. If you ever saw my Troll Bloods army, one of the things I often got complimented on the color scheme for that, pretty much every single color on all of those models had at least 2 paints that were in common with everything else that was in the model. So there was, in the mixture of each of those colors, was some of the same paint that was in every single other color on the model. So even though the browns would be different, the yellow would be different than the brown, and so on and so forth, each of them had some of the same paints mixed in, and that helped create like a cohesive paint scheme. It's very subtle, but the human eye picks up on it. I just realized I didn't plug in my computer, so it might die on us if I don't do that. Okay. So yeah, so mixing paints can help you create that cohesion. It's also just way more fun. You know, just kind of play around with it, do whatever. Okay, so I've got that. It's just, it's hard to see because I know the camera doesn't want to focus on her very well. But all I did was just stained her flesh a little, add a little brownish red into her flesh. All right, next up, what I'm gonna do. So this is where it comes in. I don't have a particular skin recipe. I just go with whatever I want. So, see a pack team. So I'm gonna start with scale 75 light skin, and I think I'm gonna add a touch of golden skin, and just for fun, let's add just a touch of basic flesh. But it's gonna be mostly light skin. I have a handy dandy paint shaker over here for me, but let's see if I can get away with this. Oh, it tried to focus on the bottles for a second. Should we give it another try? This camera's trying really hard, but there we go. Basic flesh, golden skin, light skin. Oh, it doesn't want to stay. Anyway, you can get the scale 75 makes, they make a flesh set, which I recommend if you're looking for a really good flesh set. The tricky thing is, though, scale 75 paints are not super new painter friendly. They separate really quickly. Well, you're in luck if you've got one of these. I absolutely love these holders. A lot of times, my cat is on my lap right now and my model's over there, so I can't show you the other ones. But, you know, the cork pops out. Oh, never mind. This one is. I thought I was just using blue tack on this. So they have these cork things that are split. And so so what I do is I just drill a couple holes into the bottom of a base like this, or into the feet of the model or something like that. That's just paper clip. I have some small drill bits and I don't have my a pin vise to just drill really, it's like a hand drill. You drill by hand so that you don't ruin the model by starting up a big power drill. But drill a couple holes in, glue a paper clip into it, stick it in the little hole, little slit, and then when you slide the model into it and press down, it tightens around the cork and holds the model really well. And then they've got these nice bars, so you don't have to touch the model while you're painting, and they spin, so you can rotate the model. These bars are nice. Like if I'm doing really detail work, if I was working on her eyes, I can actually brace my hand on the bar, which allows me to get really close to the model in a very solid way and get those detail work down without ever touching the model. Good stuff. I bought some in the Kickstarter, and then when they hit their retail release, I bought some more, and I contacted Stefan Rath and just asked him, because they weren't selling their bars by themselves yet. So I just asked him for more bars because I only had 2 of each size. So this is the largest size model. It's good for like 75 millimeter scale models. And then they have a medium one that's about this tall and a short one that's about this tall that's as good for like Space Marines and things like that. But what I was finding was I would be working on 2 or 3 models at the same time that all needed the same bar, and I just didn't have enough bars for those heights. So I ended up asking him, and I ordered 4 extra of the smallest bar and a couple extra of the medium size bar. So now I have a better selection. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce your name. Lemnon Sizron? Lemnon Sizron? Yeah, if you have any questions, like if you're, based on that, if there's any follow-up questions you have, let me know. I've been working with these holders for quite a bit. And I just skipped the last bit. Lemnon, is that right then? Or is there a silent letter in there? Sweet. I have not, but I would also like to find an alternative to green stuff for simple gap filling. I have a plastic putty from another brand, but I tried it once and I couldn't get it to stay down in the gaps. Like as I would put it in and then try to smooth over and to let it dry, it would just come right out of the gaps. I couldn't get it to stay where I wanted it to. So I will have to try that. Sorry, I'm just testing the consistency. Gotta get it right. All right, so we got a mixture of those 3 colors. I basically, what I'm doing over here is when I get this, I get a little bit, I tap it on my paper towel. What I'm looking for at this point, for this stage, I don't want something as quite as thin as the wash I was doing before, but I want it to be where when I tap the paper towel, it absorbs almost immediately without too much spread. But if it just sits right on top of the paper towel, it's too thick for what I'm about to do. By the way, because I know Cass, you're a newer painter. There might be some newer painters who are following along to this. There's a trick to doing highlighting and shading in terms of your brush strokes. Oh, I also should have shown you. I was telling you on Twitter I was going to show you this. So this is one of my Winsor & Newton brushes. And you can see it's quite bushy. So if you look at this, you kind of think, well, you can't do any kind of detail work with this. But what you want to do is, so I get a little bit wet first, and I roll it like this on the paper towel. So I'm rotating it as I pull it. Starts to shape the tip a little bit. Then if you get a little paint on your brush, you're going to do the same thing. So you drag it and you rotate it. I'm going to do it on my paper towel. And now it should be great for loading. And so then you can do your detail work with the brush. So if you buy your natural bristle brushes and you start to notice that they are pretty bushy when they're dry, that's okay. That's actually pretty normal. It's a sign that you've got natural bristle brushes instead of the synthetic stuff. Don't buy synthetic brushes. Just don't do it. Don't waste your money. The synthetic brushes, they're like nylon or rayon or things like that. They will start to hook on you almost immediately. So the tip, the detail tip on your brush will start to form like a little fish hook. Like it'll just start to curl right at the end. And then they're just basically worthless for what you want to do. Your natural bristle brushes, if you take care of them, so you wash them at least every couple sessions, you don't set them face down in the water and then just leave them there. Take care of them. Store them flat or store them, in a cup face up. Mine will last for a year and a half, 2 years before I have to replace them. So yeah, you end up spending $10, $15 on one of these brushes instead of $3 or $4 or $5, but they're going to last way longer. All right, back to what I was saying before about highlighting and shading. So generally what you want to do is you want to move your brush, if you're highlighting, so you're applying lighter color, you want to always move your brush in the direction of the highlight, of where you want the light to be bouncing off of. So for her, we're going to do shadows underneath the arms, and then the tops of the arms here are going to be the highlighted parts. So because I'm doing a lighter color than what the base is, I'm going to be moving my brush in the direction that I want the paint to end up at. You're going to do the opposite when you're shading, if you're applying a darker color. And the reason you do this is when your paint's thin like this, there's quite a bit of separation in your paint between the pigments and the binders and all the other stuff that's in your paint. So as you drag your brush, you're pulling pigment along with your brush, or you're pushing it along the path of your brush. And you want the pigment to end up where you want it to end up. So if you're highlighting, you want the pigment to be gathering in the places where you want the highlight. And if you're shading, you want the pigment to be gathering in the places where you have your shading. So always pay attention to the direction of your brush flow. The thinner your paint, the more extreme you're going to be able to pull your pigments like that. You might notice, again, I don't know how well the camera can focus on, this paint is not going on all that thick. Like the coverage is not super solid. But that's good. I'm going to be doing a couple passes with this color. I don't want something that's going to cover in one go. That means my paint is too thick. I want to create transitions between the colors that is nice and smooth. And then later I'll be cleaning those transitions up with some glazing. Absolutely. Duncan the Great, one of the studio painters for Games Workshop. His mantras are thin your paints and two thin coats. Sometimes it takes more than two, though. There was a meme that I got such a kick out of, I don't remember when it was, I shared it on Twitter. But it was a picture of Duncan sitting at his painting table, and it said something like thin your paints, or I will come to your house and thin them with your blood, or something like that. I just got so tickled by that. Sometimes when I start a model, I have a really good idea where I'm heading with it. Other times it's sort of just a mystery to me, and it just kind of comes together as I go. This model is still a little bit of a mystery. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do with her yet. She's got this ribbed cotton t-shirt that's on underneath a little button-up shirt she's got on top. Thinking I might do just kind of like the classic white cotton ribbed tee. Maybe stain it a little bit so it's like a little dirty. She's been fighting zombies or whatever the heck you fight in the Resident Evil games, movies. Then I was thinking, just to kind of play off of how much of a tough, awesome, powerful female character she is make the little button-up thing she's wearing over that maybe be like one of those Victoria's Secret pink lines of clothing. So then the back of her shirt will say pink on it. In a very frou-frou way. And probably put some blood stains and things like that on it just to create some contrast in ideas there. I feel you, man. Hey, Zach, did you ever see the zombie dragon that I did for my brother? It wasn't recently. It would have been if I made like a Throwback Thursday post about it, or if I put it in any of my galleries or anything. Did you ever see that zombie dragon? I'll have to try to dig some pictures up for you. This was quite a while ago, before Games Workshop came out with their most recent Zombie Dragon. They really weren't selling a Zombie Dragon. They had them in the rules, but they weren't selling them. You might have been able to order one from their classic line, but they were pretty terrible. And my brother played Vampire Counts. And at the time, playing Warhammer, if you didn't have big stompy monsters in your army lists, you basically had no chance of beating the people who were at the tournaments and things like that. So I ended up creating a zombie dragon for him. The model was probably 80% scratch built and sculpted, including every single scale on the dragon was hand sculpted. And then when I went to paint it, I was trying to do this really, really soft fade from like a dark green to kind of a yellow tan color, which required about 20 different coats on each scale. And so I was working like in little sections. I would do a little maybe 3" by 3" section on the dragon and then do another 3" by... I swear I wanted to go... I was going crazy by the time I was getting near to finishing that model. I was going to say, Zach, it seems like you've been working on that dragon for a really long time. You'll also notice I'm not being super careful as I'm painting along the edges where her skin meets other parts. You really don't have to be, because those parts are going to get painted later anyway. So don't worry about spending the extra time to be nice and neat along those edges. But this is also why when you're painting, you want to imagine the model getting dressed in the morning. So if you think about what's the bottom layer? So obviously before she puts on anything, she's got her flesh, and then she's going to put on like her t-shirt, and then on top of that is the other coat, and so on and so forth. What you want to do is you want to work from the lowest layer out. Doing that is going to minimize the amount of times you have to go back and touch things up. So if I do the skin first, and then I do the next most inner layer, then I'm painting something that's on top of the skin, and then I'm going to do the next layer, and that's going to be on top of that. So I can be more and more careful as I go without getting paint on the deeper areas of the model. That's generally the good rule to live by as you're deciding in what order you should paint things. It's going to, in the long run, cause you the least amount of headaches. So another thing I was thinking about with this model, in terms of what I want to do to try to make it my own. So I was thinking about doing that like Victoria's Secret, like pink on the back of her shirt. Have these shorts be like denim shorts. Not quite sure what to do with the stockings yet. I always like to do tattoos. I always look for places on models where I can just do crazy freehand stuff. That's the part of the model I enjoy the most, is the places I can add my own details, do things that nobody else does when they paint the same model, so it really makes it my own. I'm not sure yet what kind of tattoos this woman would have. She's somebody who does tribal type tattoos. Does she have something just crazy like does she have a parrot with flowers and leaves and stuff tattooed on her arm? I don't know. I did see that, Cass. I went back and watched that stream. He's like, if I were Alan, I would do some freehand on this. In fact, I'm going to paint some flames, right? I made a tweet when I was working on those Showgirl models that sometimes when I get stuck on a model, I'm not quite sure what to do. I just start freehanding on them. Just start playing, having fun. Yep. I think you were on the stream. I think I told the story about me getting started painting, that I wanted to do a chess set. And every single model I painted was so much better than the one before that by the time I got about 8 models in, it looked like a completely different person was painting the models. I quickly realized that at that rate, there was no way that this was going to be a cohesive chess set, and I would have to keep that dream for later when my skills got better and I could maintain my consistency more. It's still kind of something I want to do. I've never actually gotten back to that. think that would definitely be fun. I'm at a point right now where I'm having so much fun just painting whatever I want. Back when I used to play games with these miniatures, at that point you're painting a whole bunch of guys to try to look like they're all part of the same army, the same world. And now it's kind of nice to just be able to paint whatever and jump from genre to genre and change sizes of models and change scales and go from painting tiny little showgirls to painting busts or larger, like 75 millimeter models like this. But maybe something to do over time. I have to decide whether I'd want to do it as a fantasy or sci-fi. Like, should it be like one side is Space Marines and the other side is some kind of Xenos? Could go orcs or Tau or something like that. Something else, I just thought about it, because one of the reasons you want to use a crappy brush for mixing is that, so your paintbrush, all your bristles are gathered right up here in the bottom part of the metal. And especially if they're a natural brush like this, if you ever watched how the brushes are made, they're tied together. There's like a tiny little piece of thread that they tie them together here. And then that's tapped into the ferrule, and they apply some glue to keep it in place. But what happens is if you dip your paintbrush in paint and you let the paint get all the way up into the metal part and it dries in the metal part, then it starts to push your bristles apart. Because right now they're tightened together. But as you start to get paint up in there, the paint gets in between the bristles, and as it dries, it sort of splits them out. It's kind of like what will happen in a sidewalk. If you get a little crack and the water gets down there and starts to freeze and it starts to push the sidewalk apart, same kind of idea. And you'll end up with a brush that can't hold its point anymore because it pushes all the bristles apart. So the way that the bristles sit is they should have a natural well that's about 2/3 of the way up the brush head. So as I dip my brush in the paint, especially like watered down paint like this, the bristles are going to have a wicking motion or wicking like property. And they're going to suck the paint up into the well that's right there about 2/3 of the way up. And that's where it's going to sit. And when I touch it onto my paper towel, it pulls out some of that excess, but it leaves paint in the well. And then as you drag your bristles, it puts a slight pressure along the bristles and it starts to release some of the paint. And that's how you get paint flow off of your brush. So you don't want to let the paint get up into your bristles, which if you're mixing paint, you're just getting paint all the way up in there. So if you use an old brush for that, then you don't have to worry about ruining anything because it's already ruined. But if you ever find yourself like you dip your paint too much, you dip your brush in the paint too much, or you notice that paint's getting up in there, just wash it immediately. You'll notice I wash my brush pretty frequently. I try to keep it clean. And that's part of keeping your proper brush care. Keep it clean. They make brush soaps. If you don't have one of those, you should get it. But like I said, it's more for your natural bristle brushes. I'm going to make one more pass with this color. Then I'm going to start lightening it a little bit. Well, thanks for stopping by, Cass. Hopefully you got something out of this, and have a good weekend. I know you're a little stressed, and hopefully school goes well for you this upcoming week. But we'll see you around. Do I have any ideas to make a stream? Like I said, I'm still working with Josh to figure out what we're going to do together. It might be... Weekends tend to be better for me in terms of being able to do something fairly common. Sunday afternoons might be a thing. It might be like this time every week. And then I'm not totally sure. And right now I'm just content to be learning to use my new equipment and just sort of streaming when I can get a chance. And as things develop kind of organically, I think we'll fall into a pattern of when these things will be. But feel free to shoot me a message on Twitter if there's times when you would prefer for me to stream or times you don't want me to stream. I know there's a lot of other people that you watch. We'll see what we can do. One of the things you guys might notice, I don't know how long you usually take to paint a miniature yourself. I feel like my painting techniques should be called How to Paint a Miniature in as long a time as you possibly can stand. So the guy we were talking about, Josh, he has a stream that he paints minis on, and sometimes he sits down in 2 hours and mostly knocks a miniature out. I don't know, what time is it right now, 3 o'clock? We'll be lucky in 2 hours to get to more than our second color. So hopefully you're here for the company and not just the finished models, because I think you'll be disappointed if you're like, can I learn how to go from a bare model to a fully painted model in 2 hours? That this is not the stream for you. One of the things I'd like to do is some of the things that Josh is doing. And again, I hope to be streaming with them some. But when I'm streaming on my own, it'd be nice to kind of follow some of the things that they're doing that is so good. Like I really, really like their format where they have the co-host who kind of is doing some things and keeping conversation going and monitoring chat. And then the painter can just sort of talk along with the co-host and still be interacting with chat without having to be monitoring the chat room himself. We'll see. I have to decide if I have interesting enough people that I can have on that are local, that can sit next to me and paint. Otherwise, I'm going to have to contact awesome people like Zach and have him call in, but I don't know what that does to the lag time on the streams. And one thing you might notice as we start to add more and more layers of these colors, and I'm going to lighten it a bit in a second here and start to even go lighter, do more highlighting. So her flesh is going to start to get really pale and washed out, which is not very natural unless you're trying to paint a zombie, like a vampire or something. But that's okay, because later we can go back in and do some glazing passes that's going to restore a lot of the tone and vibrancy back to the paint without sacrificing all the nice layers and transitions that we've been building up, and in fact will help to smooth those out and make it a little more natural. that'll be in the stage where we start doing some shading and some glazing later. Gotta get all the highlights done first. I suppose you don't have to, but occurred to me maybe to talk about painting eyes, which are always a tricky thing. So there's two ways, at least two ways, to paint eyes on a miniature. One of the ways is much, much easier to paint the eyes, but you're far more likely to mess something up as you go, and you have to redo the eyes and then kind of all was for naught. The other way is harder, but it lets you be a little sloppier when you're doing things like painting the flesh tones. So one of these days I'll just do an eye tutorial, but the easiest way to do eyes is before you even paint the flesh, or maybe after you've base coated the flesh, is you just glop a bunch of white paint into the eye sockets. You don't even have to be nice with it. It can go everywhere. You can get onto the skin, doesn't matter. Then you take black paint and you essentially paint one vertical bar down each eye. So just down each eye. And what you're really trying to do is create some motion. So if you want the person looking to the side, you're going to put the bars, in each side so it looks like the eyes are looking to the side and so forth. So what you should have is you should have some black within each place where the eye is and some white, and they balanced in a way that your model is looking from wherever you want them to look. Then you go back in with your base coat, and this is one of the times where you want your paint maybe a little bit thicker, but you just outline the eye. Actually, if you really want to make it look nicer, you would first outline in a darker color, like a dark gray if you want it to look like somebody's wearing mascara or something, or like a really dark red brown. And you're just going to outline the eye. And then you go back in with your flesh tone and leave just the slightest bit of that line showing around the eye. So this is going to make really good looking eyes, and it's not too difficult. Anybody can make good looking eyes doing that. Then you have to paint, when you paint all your skin, you have to be really careful not to let any paint get down into the eye socket, which is difficult because, like I said before, about painting from the bottom up. So if that's one way to do it, but because it's a deep recess, if you get any kind of wet, runny paint right around the eye, it's just going to run right down into the eye socket. It's going to ruin what you've done. So you have to be much more careful while you're painting the skin, but it's a lot easier to do the eye that way. The harder way to do it is to do it after the fact, because you have to really have a nice detail brush and steady hands and go in and actually paint an eye afterwards. But what's nice is you don't have to be very careful in the process of painting the model. You just have to be careful at that point that you don't mess up the face. So it's a trade-off. Depends which way you want to do it. All right, let's lighten this skin up a little bit. What should we do? I'm going to add a touch more golden skin, and I'm going to add, which do I want? I'll keep going with the actual stuff that's in the flesh paint set. So I'm going to add just a touch more golden skin, keep the skin from going too pale and washed out, because once you start getting to straight pale skin, this is pretty, and you can just see my skin right next to it. This is not really all that realistic of a flesh tone. I'm a pretty white guy, but you can see my skin has a lot of red in it. There's some blue showing at the veins, variation in color as you go along, so there's more red in my knuckles. It gets a little paler at parts. Palm has color variations. It has some really light spots. It has some red in it, things like that. So this is pretty washed out for flesh tones. But like I said, we can go back in and add in some of the nice tones. What we want to do is build up layers so that there's color variations underneath the final flesh color that we'll end up with. You can see there's a really exact science to this. Just squirt some in there. Don't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can always fix it later. But experimenting is the fun part of the painting process. At least I find it to be. It's how you learn things. You know, you'll never learn what the difference in adding, say, you know, more of the pale skin to adding straight white, or to adding Moonray Flesh, which is another very pale flesh color that I have, or even just adding some like off-white, like GW Screaming Skull or something like that. Just what happens if you add it. Add it and paint and find out. It's just paint. You can always strip it or paint over it. But you'll learn. Get adventurous. Add some colors you didn't think you should. So if you're working on metal or something like that, in your shadow colors, add some blue, add some red, add some green. Just see what happens when you add some colors in when you're doing shading and highlighting. All right, I think I need to mix this a little lighter. Better. Paint consistency is the other thing. If you go on forums and ask somebody what your paint consistency should be, you'll hear all sorts of things like should be like skim milk, or I don't know even what that really means. I mean, who's going to look at something and go, oh, that's more like skim milk versus 1%, or versus I don't pay that much attention to my milk. I don't know what the difference in that and water, and it's kind of a silly comparison. So you learn by doing, you learn by trial and error. And if you're wondering what I just did, I have about 10 of these paint wells that I use and then I clean, and I reuse, and so on. But if the paint dries in them, they are way more of a hassle to clean. So before the paint fully dries in there, if I clean it out with a little bit of scrap paper towel, I can keep using the well for longer before it just gets so gunky that I have to clean it, and the cleaning is a little bit easier. So I'm just going over the top layer. I'm starting right around where the other color was being applied. Again, dragging towards my highlights so that more of the paint is being deposited further away from the edge of the previous color that I painted. Try to encourage a nice smooth transition from one color to the next. And with thin paint, and a few passes, it's pretty good. Now, a question you might ask is, how do I know where to put my highlights? A couple ways to answer that. One is you can actually take your model once it's assembled, maybe after it's primed, and just hold it under a light. Find a light source. Hold it under the light, very bright. Take your camera and actually take pictures of it and just keep rotating it. Because ideally, not a lot of models are painted from a single light source. They kind of actually pretend like there's a halo of light around about 45 degrees up from the model. So kind of pretend the light's coming like this, but sort of from all around. So that no matter which direction you look at the model, you see highlights and shadows. Some people do cool effects where, they'll do like there's a street light or something shining on the model, so they'll do cool colors on the other side for shadows, and then lighter, warmer colors where the light is that gets some of that object source lighting, and that's cool. But like just for your basic run-of-the-mill model, usually it's best to sort of pretend like there's kind of a halo of light shining down on them. So take multiple pictures of your model and see where the true shadows go when you have a light coming from that direction. As you turn the model, take more pictures and go all the way down. Or when in doubt, just kind of hold your brush and just wherever the tip of your brush would hit the model as you're coming in from the 40 degrees long, like that's kind of where you want your highlight. And then you're going to shade sort of at the 45-degree opposite of that. When in doubt, highlight up, shade down, and you'll be fine. I don't know how many people are still watching, but if you're still out there, hopefully you've been keeping safe the last couple weeks. The crazy cold front moving through parts of our country. Here we've been having unseasonably warm temperatures, which has been creating our own set of problems. But for example, my area here, there's a big problem with scorpions who tend to be very active during the warmer months. So from like March to late September, early October. And my neighborhood is 18 right now, 70 on Friday. Wow, those are some swings. But because it's been warm, we just had one little cold snap like 2 weeks ago. It got really, for us, it got Arizona cold. Caused all the trees in the neighborhood to drop all their leaves like all at once. And then it warmed back up to the mid to high 70s. So things like the scorpions are waking back up like they think it's spring. So we just found another one in our house the other day, which usually we don't start finding them again until more the springtime. Other people in the neighborhood have said they've started to see them in their yards and houses as well. My cats, they always grow a winter coat that they shed at the end of winter. So usually right around the transitions of the seasons, they'll have lots of hairballs and things like that. So that kind of played havoc on them to have such extreme weather swings in a short period of time. But those are minor problems compared to what some of the people like in New York and stuff have been facing. not a huge following today. Seems like people watching paint dry doesn't appeal to a lot of people. I don't know. This guy just keeps painting the same color on his model over and over again. So boring. It's my meditation. I ordered the paints from, so I have the normal scale 75 paint line, their original paint line. I also have their fantasy and games paint line, but they started releasing one called, I believe it's called Warfront, which are specifically colored to be for historical miniatures. So lots of browns and greens and things like that, which is nice because I'm not the biggest fan of several of the greens that Scale makes in their other two lines, and their browns. I think they could use some more neutral browns and things like that. So I'm excited. They're having a 15% off Christmas sale. I ordered the entire line of the Warfront paints. They haven't got here yet, and I keep worrying that they're sitting somewhere in all of that cold mess and just freezing and thawing in a warehouse somewhere. I'm really hoping that when they get to me that they aren't ruined. So are there any other painting streams I watch? No. I have occasionally popped into Brush Wizard and or what's the person he streams with? I think her name is Sophie. Hobbyist Girl, is that maybe her name? I've occasionally popped in on theirs, and they do a really regular streaming. There's a couple video game streamers. I shouldn't say a couple. There's one video game streamer I watch, Baphomet, who I actually found through Uzak, and I just watch her because I think she's hilarious. But I don't really watch paint streams. That I probably should watch it more, but I don't know. When I'm painting, when I'm painting is usually the only time I'm sitting down watching stuff. And oftentimes when I'm painting with my wife in the room. And so we're watching something together. And I don't like to put on headphones and just close off because it's kind of nice to sort of be a little bit present in the same place together. So I just haven't really found myself watching many streams. Are there any that you recommend? I think my wife just got home. I've watched some of his videos. Hello? Hello? I've watched some of his stuff because he's got some of the tips for airbrushing. So I've watched a couple of his videos, and I mean he's more about how to use techniques to get your army painted. But I've learned a few things from him. Hello.
Hi.
Do you want to say hi to people?
Hello, people.
Hello, all the peoples.
Hello.
Yeah, I watched some of Cujo's videos. I don't know if does he ever go live? I don't know. I got with the wrong direction. If you catch it quick, you can fix mistakes. Just get a little bit of water on your brush. Did you guys have a good time at storage?
Oh, wait. Yes.
Zach says hello.
Hello.
I'm not sure who Sorastro is. I don't think I've heard of him. Or at least don't recognize the name. I gotta figure out how to force this camera to focus on the model. I'm wondering if I put it on a white background, if it's going to force it to. Might be better. I don't have a good light over here, but the webcam actually might be a clearer image, but you hopefully can see, so you see underneath the arm versus what's going on top. Hello.
Hello.
Do you want to say hi to all the peoples?
Hello.
That is my wife's sister. Hello.
Yeah, we got the blue ones too. You want that? Oh, yeah. This fits all sizes of lids. That's nice. Have you seen the silicone ones that they sell? Yes, I want that. What's your tail, Papa? I know, Susie said that Charlie did it one day. Yeah, right. No, cats are not moving. He got worried.
That's what you said, Jen.
I know, that's why.
That was and we saw it in action because Tango did that in the short time he lived with us. So are you painting today, Zach? What are you doing? Give them life while it drives you crazy, right? Just keep plinking away, man. Try to get in your zone. I'm trying to, before I do the very final highlights on this skin, I'm trying to smooth out what's there. So I'm going to keep applying until the top lightest part has a nice even coverage on it. When I was painting those Malifaux showgirls, when I was painting the mannequins, the one with the purple coloring on it, I was trying to see just how far I could push glazing as a means of tying together different layers. So for the blue color, I did kind of like what I'm doing here, and I did lots of sort of different layers, building up from dark to light and then going back in and counter glazing and doing shading and stuff like that. And then on the purple one, I pretty much just painted some really light, bright spots where the final highlighting was going to go. And then I just started glazing, and it took 2 or 3 times as many passes on the glazes, but it ended up looking pretty much identical to the blue. Which makes me wonder sometimes if I can apply that to a flesh tone. Could I basically just glaze my way to a smooth flesh tone from going from the mid and then just painting some of the most extreme highlights and then just glazing back and forth? But I might try that one day. Not necessarily a faster way to do everything, but just a different technique, see what it looks like. seeing my computer screen over there and my email, like my Windows Mail, shows in the last 40 minutes that I have 10 emails that popped up, which worries me on a Sunday. Hoping it's just junk spam mail, but hoping that's not a bunch of work stuff I have to deal with when the stream is over. Normally I could just ignore it and pretend I didn't see it, because I don't always check my email at all on Sunday to give myself a break, but that's worrying me. Hey! Will you come get him? He's chewing on the cords. That's my little angel.
Come here. Sancho. Come. Come here. Come on. Oh.
Ah, cats. Yeah, exactly. Caught red paw. And the thing was, he wasn't just chewing on, he was chewing on the cord for my mechanical paint shaker, which if you chews through that, I don't know, be kind of a pain to replace. It's not just like a... This is the part of the broadcast where if anybody's watching the replay, they can just put it on double speed if they haven't already and not miss much. Who am I kidding? They could have done that this whole time. I've been like, you're still painting slow. Getting close. Probably need to flip this. I don't know how much I've been painting that's been off screen. But like I said, nobody probably cares because they're just watching this guy paint the same dang color on the same areas 20 different times. I think this can be the last pass with this color. That is true. I lied. There's a couple places I have to touch up real quick. And then this color will be done. Tough thing with this though, this is how you get buttery smooth finishes. But it's tough. And what I was saying before too about mixing my paints, because I always mix paints. I can't like stop in the middle of stuff. So oftentimes it will constrain or extend my painting sessions. Like I'll get to a point where like, okay, well, the next thing I need to do, if I start it, it's going to take 2 hours to finish it. So the question is, do I have 2 hours to finish it or not? So I have to think if there's something else I can work on that it's not going to take that long, or I can stop and start. Or once I start something, sometimes I have to just keep painting until I finish it. For some reason, her right arm, it's not as smooth as her left arm. I feel like I'm having to put more layers on that arm. Somebody who's been watching this might actually have noticed. Perhaps I have been skipping over the right arm on some of my passes. Who knows? I'll just keep doing the left arm. Alright, I think it's good for that. What time is it? Alright, I am not going to start the next layer because, as I said, I would then need to finish it. So what I'm going to do is I'll wait. I think what I'll do could be fun is I will only work on this model while I'm streaming, and I can just focus on that. So I'll pick this up the next time I stream and go and do the lighter color. I'm going to take a mixture similar to what I have now, maybe add a little white paint to it, do the final layers, do the final highlights. And then start doing some tonal glazing and some shading. But there she is in all her unfocused glory at the moment, and if you're not seeing her in focus, she probably just looks like a glob of pale flesh skin tone. But hopefully you can see some of the shadows that are in there, some of the transitions on her legs that I've been building up, transition along from the underside to the outer side of her arms. We'll get some nice skin tones next time and start accentuating some of those shadows as well. All right. Thanks everybody who showed up on stream today. Thanks for hanging out, Zach and Cass and Heath, and who else showed up? Lemon, Pack Team, Lamolvello. All right. Till next time, guys. Take care.